All right. So our speaker today is Stephen Lazard, who directs the Ruth and Harold Newman Office of Prestigious Scholarships and Fellowships at Hunter College. So before moving to his current position at Hunter, he was for 3 years the Dean of Student Life in Harvard College. He served 6 years as Deputy Dean of the college at Brown. And before that, for 14 years, he was Dean of Calhoun Grace Hopper College at Yale University. A lot of Ivies, huh? He has published 2 books on the history of childhood in the 19th and 20th century America, and is currently writing a book on the way that children in the United States have learned about authority since World War II. So he'll begin off with his presentation. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Lynn, for inviting me. I've been wanting to talk to your group for quite a while. I finally got an invitation, so my life is complete. And it's really great to meet you all. You know, when I give these presentations, I never know who's going to show up. Sometimes it's all first years and second years. I think there's kind of a scattering here. Most of what I have to say, just in terms of the specific fellowships I'm talking about, like categorically, or for first and second year students. For those of you who are juniors or seniors, you know, there are actually many more fellowships available to you. So you should make an appointment to see me so I can talk to you about the fellowships that are applicable to you in particular. Lynn is going to talk specifically about the AANAPISI scholarship, which she's been quite successful in helping our students win over the last few years. And so it's really great to be part of this team. I want to start with a more basic question than how to successfully apply for a fellowship. And that is, why apply for a fellowship? And what is the difference between a scholarship and a fellowship? I only have 20 minutes, so ordinarily I would make this interactive and ask you to answer that question, but I'm going to answer it for you, so for the sake of saving some time. The answer is there's no difference between a fellowship and a scholarship these days. At one time there was. A fellowship was something that brought people together into fellowship for a common purpose, or to study something in common. A scholarship was money given for some sort of special educational opportunity. These days, everything pretty much falls under the category of scholarship. The reason I'm bothering to talk about the 2 terms is that a lot of students see the word fellowship and they feel scared away. They feel like, well, I don't know what that is, so it must not be for me. But in fact, it is for you. Okay, so whether it's called a scholarship or a fellowship, you should think of yourself as possibly a candidate and talk to somebody like Lynn or me about the suitability of your application. Okay, I'm going to go to my next slide here if I can. There we go. So I think of the reasons why you should apply is falling into 2 broad categories. One is the extrinsic rewards. And the first one is it gives you funding for a special opportunity that you wouldn't have otherwise. If you didn't have funding, for instance, through the RAB Presidential Summer Research Scholarship, you may not be able to spend your summer focusing on research that you'll use for a senior thesis or a capstone. A scholarship is a distinction that enhances future success in your field, whatever it is. It goes on your resume for the rest of your life, or for as long as you choose to display it on your resume. And as you apply for jobs or internships or fellowships, graduate school, professional school, that's a credential that stands you apart from other candidates. It oftentimes will put you in another pile of consideration. So it's a badge of merit, if you will. So it also increases the likelihood that you'll get future support when you apply for other fellowships. If you win one fellowship like the AANAPISI, it's more likely that when you, like Christina, apply for the Fulbright, that you'll get it. Okay, so that's another extrinsic reward. And finally, as I mentioned before, it makes you a more desirable candidate for professional and graduate school, whether it's medical school, if you want to be a clinical psychologist, if you want to be an historian, all those things. If you get wins scholarships along the way, it makes you a better candidate. Then there are intrinsic rewards, all right? And I think there are probably 5 or 6 that I can think of. The first is that any fellowship application forces you to think about who you are, to discover yourself, where you come from. This is Jeanette Wu, who just wrote this memoir about being an American-born Chinese. She graduated just last year or the year before. She was a member of the Chinese flagship, but then wrote about the experience of being an immigrant growing up in New York City. I've read a good chunk of it already. It's really great. I advise you to go out and get a copy if you can. But in the process of writing a fellowship application, writing a personal statement, you come to terms with who you are and what you care about, where you come from, what your obligations are, how you're connected to other people. So that's an intrinsic reward. Another is you discover your purpose. What is it that you want to do with yourself? What are you meant to do? What are you preparing yourself to do? What are your goals? Also, what are you good at? What good are you to the world? What good can you do? What skills do you have? All of these things are things that are that you're asked to talk about in your fellowship application. Also, when you put together a personal statement, oftentimes you're asked to kind of string together all the different things that you do to connect the dots. So you have the curriculum that you're pursuing, your major, you have the good grades to show for it. You have extracurricular activities, which are oftentimes connected to your curriculum, but they're also jobs that you do. It could be working in McDonald's. It could be an internship that's involved with what your curricular choices are. It could be family obligations. Oftentimes students work 20 hours a week, but it's at a job that has nothing to do with what they want to do ultimately. So they think, well, I'm not going to put that on there. Or they have a family responsibility. It's like their job to take a grandparent to see the doctor. That is part of who you are. And it's important to the foundations that evaluate applications to understand the whole person. So you don't want to omit that. That's a part of who you are, and they care about that. That's the story that you have to tell about yourself. And in connecting the dots, you create a narrative about yourself that you're going to tell other people. You know a lot of things about yourself that other people don't. You take them for granted. You may think they're not interesting, okay? But you have to fashion them into a narrative that so other people can understand who you are, what you care about, what your aspirations are, what motivates you. Okay, all those things go into the personal statement for a fellowship application. Okay, now I want to talk about what it takes to be a successful applicant. So this is related to what Lynn focuses on, but I'm going to talk more generally about the qualities of successful applicants. First of all, you need intellectual curiosity. Somebody who's intellectually curious is somebody who is able to synthesize concepts and ideas from different fields. So if you look across the courses you're taking and you're constantly making connections, you're somebody who's intellectually curious. If you're somebody who's going beyond the reading list for your course and reading other things just because you find them fascinating and you go more deeply into your discipline, you're somebody who's intellectually curious. Intellectual curiosity is the primary ingredient in successful candidates. Mentoring is I'd say it's the X factor in successful candidates. Getting an education in college at a Hunter depends on mentoring, okay? Taking the credits that you need to earn your degree will get you a degree. It won't get you an education, but it's having conversations with people who take an interest in you and who know you. They understand what you're interested in. They know you over a period of time. They know what you care about. They know how your interests have changed, how your goals have changed over time. That all depends on mentoring. At the most purely instrumental level, you need 3 mentors to get out of college and to do the next thing. Okay, that means 3 letters of recommendation from people who know you well. And it's not oh, you get the best grade in a class of 300 people, that really, I mean, okay, you did well in that class, but the professor who graded your exams and your papers, who gave you that grade, all they can say about you based on that is that you were the best person in the class, nothing else, okay? You have to have a conversation with the professors so they get to know you and understand you, what motivates you, so they can say something of substance and write about you in detail. One of the things that I think, big universities like Hunter often fail at, and my university was the same. I went to the University of Minnesota. Huge, it's a bigger university. It's 35,000 students. Like Hunter, it's a commuter school. You have to work hard at a place like that to get people to know you. They don't come to you to get to know you. You have to go to them. It's a two-way street. Okay. If you understand that it's part of your education, you make time for it, you will connect with professors. They will take an interest in you. It can be intimidating though, okay? Because, it's often hard to think about, well, this person's like 20 years older than me. They're not going to care about me. They're so accomplished. Who am I? I'm nobody, right? It's easy to feel that way. But if you think about it from their point of view, there are things to talk to your professors about other than what's going to be on the next exam, or what should I write my paper on, or I didn't understand your lecture, okay? Think about what matters to them. Other than their families, which I hope are most important to them, the next most important thing is what they research and write. They've been spending their entire lives, they've dedicated themselves to doing research and writing. It's easy to find out what most people care about in their writing because it's published. Most of the people who teach courses at Hunter have published something. Most of it is available online. You can just get on Google Scholar and look it up. And you can read an article by your professor before you go in and have a conversation with them. There's nothing, I can tell you, there's nothing more flattering than having a student who's read your work, so that you're one of the 6 people on earth who's actually read something by them, right? And they've put their heart and soul into this. So this can become the basis for a relationship with any one of your professors. So one of your jobs every semester is to go into office hours, just choose one professor, the one that you like the most for whatever reason, and get to know them, talk to them about their work. They, I can guarantee you, will take an interest in you, all right? But just a caveat, and not all professors have great social skills, okay? Let's be honest. A lot of them don't know how to carry on a conversation. That's where you can practice your social skills. A lot of times you'll feel like you're restarting the conversation all the time. It's not you, it's just, these are people oftentimes who spend a lot of time doing the research and writing, not a lot of time socializing. So you oftentimes have to carry the water in those relationships. I'm being very blunt here, but just know that it can be an uncomfortable kind of situation, but it's your obligation and it'll pay off. All right, enough on that, but please remember how important mentoring is. Internships and other experiences, jobs are also important to fellowships. It's not only, the credential on your resume, but it's what you learn in the internship. Even if it's you learn that you don't care about becoming a lawyer, if that's what it is, that you worked in a law firm, you realize that's not for you. You learn more about yourself and you can talk about that experience. You can be in an interview and let's say, we notice that you interned at this law firm. What did you do? And, what did you find interesting about it? You can say, well, actually nothing. I learned I didn't want to be a lawyer. That's important, okay? And that matters. So internships are things that fellowships look for. Also, leadership, increasingly. And I don't mean simply being, the head of an organization, being the head of student government. That's good, okay? But it's also other experiences that you have that count as leadership. Are you somebody who influences other people? Do you change people's minds? What is the difference? What difference do you make in being a part of an organization? Do you move people into action? Do you make them care about things? Those are forms of leadership. And you need to learn how to articulate this in your personal statements and on your resumes. Because for good or bad, fellowships care about this. Okay, and so you need to learn how to talk about it in a way that will make you a better applicant. Skillful writing is extremely important in being a successful applicant for a fellowship or going to graduate school. in college is the place where you can learn how to write better. You need to get feedback from your professors, demand it, okay? If you don't get a paperback with no comments, go in and talk to your professor about it. They've read it, maybe they don't have time to write comments on it, but you need to learn how to make your writing better. I'm always improving my writing by writing and practicing it. So remember that to get that practice while you're in college. Experience applying for scholarships will make you a better and more successful applicant. The first few times you apply, you probably won't get it. Most people don't. But each time you apply for a fellowship, you'll get better at applying, especially if you go back to Lynn or you come back to me and you say, how can I make myself better next time? What can I do? Sometimes there are things you can do. Sometimes it's the luck of the draw. So a large amount of luck in these, both acceptances and rejections. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to be mindful of the time here. Okay. So the qualities, a lot of the quality, just to review here, the qualities that are found in successful applicants are demonstration of intellectual curiosity, academic excellence. For most of the scholarships I oversee, that's a minimum GPA of 3.5, but for study abroad, it can be 3.0. Extensive extracurricular activities and engagement in a sustained way, a record of leadership, energy, and personal ambition, and finally, well-written essays. All right, I'm galloping toward the finish line here because I know we have other people who are going to talk to you, but it's important to know that for those of you who are first and second years, that these stepping stone scholarships, the ones that give you experience early on, doing some opportunity you wouldn't have had a chance to do otherwise, are very important. There are a bunch of internal fellowships at Hunter. These are the ones that off the top of my head that I deal with on a regular basis: Grove, JFU, Mellon Mays, McNulty, the Mellon Public Humanities Fellowship, RAB and Tuckman Summer Residency Research Fellowships. These are internal. These aren't even the ones that I deal with on a regular basis, but I'm always referring students to them because these are the building blocks of future success. They give you practice applying for fellowships. They give you invaluable opportunities. AANAPISI is another wonderful one. Again, you all have been very successful in applying for these. So these are critical to future success in applying for scholarships. Study abroad, there's like half a dozen that will pay for an entire year abroad or a semester abroad, even a January term or a summer experience. Most students at Hunter seem to like summer study abroad experiences, but they come in all shapes and sizes. I can help you with your applications for all of these. I'm the institutional liaison for most of them, so keep that in mind. I think we're not sure about whether there's going to be any kind of spring experience at this point, but I think certainly summer is in the offing as we approach next summer. Another fellowship I want first and second years to know about is the Jeanette K. Watson Fellowship, which is a succession of 3 internships during the summer, the first in New York, second in the United States, anywhere but New York, and the third anywhere in the world except the United States. It's worth $25,000 if you get it. It comes with mentoring, lots of feedback, thinking about the connections between your curricular and extracurricular choices. It's been a launching pad for a lot of students. Last year, somebody interviewed for both the Schwarzman and the Marshall, who's a Watson Fellow this year. A Watson Fellow named Devashish Basnet is a Schwarzman candidate. He's being interviewed in a couple of weeks. He's also a Rhodes candidate after that. So it's been a real bridge to major fellowships afterwards. I just want to mention that there's a great search engine for fellowships that aren't listed on my website called Grant Forward. You can search that for free. And then some resources. I have office hours every week from 10 to 5, remotely on Mondays and Fridays, in person Tuesday through Thursday. Just go on my website and there's a gold box at the top and it has this URL here that you see at the bottom. You click on it and you can put yourself into my schedule to make an appointment with me. And then finally, I have biannual writing workshops with Margaret Sabin. It's a week-long workshop It teaches you how to write a personal statement. More than 180 students have taken it so far in the last 4 years, and 85% of them have won major fellowships. So if you're interested in doing that, write to me. Finally, practice interviews. If you get a final round interview for a major fellowship, I'll bring together a panel of faculty and other people to give you practice before you have your final interview. And I don't know if there's time for questions. I'm on the clock here with Lynn. Lynn, do we have time for 1 or 2 questions or not?
Yeah, of course. But I'm gonna cut you off if anything. But like, there's also a Q&A. So like, why don't we, if there's any burning questions, please feel free to ask Stephen right now. Unmute yourself. If not, then we could just save it towards the end, because we did portion a time off for Q&A.
Okay. Burning questions now. Anyone?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
How likely is it that like if a student writes to you and wants to join those like kind of writing personal statement boot camps, how likely are they going to get a spot?
Oh, it's 100% guaranteed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I've never turned anyone down.
Okay, that's good. All right, so why don't I share my presentation, and then like we could all discuss. You're not helping out, right, Stephen?
No, I'll be here.
Okay, that's good.
So I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, thank you. I'm just gonna, okay, so let me just share my screen. So thank you, Stephen, for just a great overview. And now I'm gonna kind of get into the nitty gritty of like actually writing the statement, right? Okay, let me, gotta move this aside. Oops. So writing a winning scholarship application. And so the way I'm presenting this is really general, like just like personal statement essays that you see in scholarships, fellowships, grad school. I think a lot, I'm trying to keep it kind of broad, but the strategies are applicable across all these different kind of applications, right? Okay. So first thing, personal statements, they're often required for grad school, professional program, and internship. They're a genre of writing that is super important because you need it for various things. So first thing that I want to share is that we often think of these personal statements as just like personal narratives and essays, right? Which they are, but they're also argument pieces, right? So basically, why you, right? So it's written in the first person with a very natural voice. And what you're arguing is that you have the quality, skills, experiences, interests, and goals that really align with the mission, objectives, and the work of the program, the funder. So it's really about making that case. And overall, you'll have some that are very general personal statement prompt, such as like provide a statement of purpose that addresses your decision to pursue graduate studies. And then you have more specific ones, drawing on relevant coursework and professional experience. Please discuss your academic interests, your motivations for applying to this program, and your career goals, right? So when you're applying, there's going to be different prompts, and make sure you actually read the prompts and address it. You know, don't be lazy and try to use the same essay. So we really, you know, if we think about personal statements as a genre of writing, right? We have to understand reader expectations. And, you know, when you start applying for things, you'll see that the language is kind of used interchangeably. So like personal statement, statement of purpose, letter of intent, statement of interest. So they're often used interchangeably, right? And in order to really figure out what is the reader's expectation, you really should read the prompt and the application guidelines first, right? And another important thing that students kind of forget to do is to actually look at the website to understand the mission, and also to find application resources, right? So I'm just gonna quickly run through one of the websites. Okay, let me just stop sharing for now. Just as an example, but these are things that you could do with other websites. I take the AANAPISI one because I've been working with students on it. So let me share the screen again. So this is the website, right? And what we see is that application resources. So it's application season for them as well. So I go to scholarship and I click on AANAPISI scholarship. Here, there's like key information, deadlines. Don't wait until the last minute to submit your application. And then there's like all these other guidelines and eligibility. You want to be strategic. If you don't qualify, don't apply, right? You just kind of be wasting your time. Another thing is that like, if you go back to the main page, you see there's application resources and most sites will have something to that extent, right? So I go to application resources, there's an application guide, always read that, right? And then there's application tips. So here there's like tips for essays, right? And they tell you that you pick 3 out of the 4 essays, right? And even you see how essay 1, they give you the prompt, and then lower on they say focus. This is what they're looking for. So one thing, let's go back to the slide. Sorry, there's a lot of moving around. Are you seeing the slides? Not yet, right? Sorry, I'm just talking to myself.
It's okay, not yet, but it's coming up now, Lynn.
Are you seeing it now?
It's good.
Okay. So, okay. I know that was super fast to look at the website together, but so what do we learn based on the website look, right? We see that they are focused on underserved Asian American Pacific Islander students. I know that was super quick, but trust me, that's what the fellowship's about, the scholarship's about. Also, one thing that I didn't show you was the scholar profiles. So the scholar profiles are actually students that won this scholarship, right? And if you click on their names, they actually have sort of like their bios and like history. So one thing you want to do is also like, who are these students? Are there similarities to how their bios are structured? What does it tell you about the backgrounds and experiences that the funder values, right? So also on the page about eligibility, everything was like pretty straightforward. Like you have to be like be a US citizen or like a permanent resident. But there was one sentence that says like, they're looking for people that have a strong emphasis on community service and leadership, as well as solid academic achievement, right? So, and another thing is that on their tip sheet, I saw that they had this one statement: avoid generic answers and avoid thinking your life is generic. Write boldly, right? So that's pretty straightforward, right? But how do you write boldly? How do you not be a cliche, right? One thing you could do is don't have vague generalizations or cliches. Like, I like helping people, so I want to be a doctor. Or like statements of like unsupported claims. Like, I am an effective communicator, right? Show us, don't tell us these things, right? So demonstrate your skills, passion, values, and action. And you do that by describing specific examples, experiences, and personal details. Okay, so we have that. So now I'm going to show you 2 examples of winning applications, right? Example 1 is a response to a general prompt, statement of grant purpose. This is for a Fulbright. Response 2 is actually to a specific prompt, and it's for the AANAPISI scholarship, right? Where the applicants are being asked, discuss an issue of importance for you and how your Asian American identity influence your, I can't see because of your, wait, sorry.
Perspective of this issue.
Yes, perspective of this issue. Sorry, there was like closed captioning and I couldn't read it. Okay, so I'm gonna show those 2 examples, but as you're reading each example, I want you to think about what made these experiences interesting to read. What does it tell you about the applicants? And what was different about the responses? So let's look at the first one. The first one is for a Fulbright, right? It's general kind of statement. Why don't I give you all like maybe 2 minutes to read that? do we need more time? Okay, so you might not have finished it, but I think you get the gist of it, right? So this is example 2, which is like describe something, an issue that is important to you and how it connects to your identity. Maybe another minute. Okay. What are initial thoughts? What made it interesting to read? Let's look at the first one about the educator. You could just drop it in the chat if you want to, or you could shout out. Yes, so it was very specific and personal, right? And it was specific because it actually described an example. There was also there was also language to actually describe a scene. For the first one, we saw it was a classroom, right? And we have this image of the applicant walking around the classroom and checking on students, right? What else was it? What else made it interesting? I think there was when you see both of them, you'll see that there's some kind of problem or tension that arises and that actually gets resolved towards the end, right? So it actually reads like a narrative, a story of sorts. Did you all notice a little difference between the style? I'm gonna call on Caitlin. Sorry.
Well, I actually wonder if we can loop back to this comment that Stephen has, and then we can go, but he put something in about looking at recipients' bios and feeling a little intimidated, right? So I wonder if you just want to respond to that first before we lose that part.
Okay, yes. Okay, let me share screen again. I think in some ways, like, yes, it could be intimidating, but it also is a great resource. I'll show you why. Let me see. Screen. So, you know, like with other websites, like the Sorrells Fellowship, they actually have recipients talk about their writing process, right? But it's a little different for APIA scholars. You see that they have like kind of short responses, but also really long ones. And like the thing is that, yeah, they might be accomplished at the same time, but these kind of bios also give you kind of like a structure or things to emulate, right? So I think someone in the chat, Alice, mentioned that like, oh, I have internship experience, but it might not translate fully, in the same way that like, if you see that, oh, community experience, right? Like, how can you think about your own experiences in a way that kind of emulates what's being written in the bios? Does that make sense? Right? So it could be intimidating, but at the same time, like, you also have to think about this fellowship. This fellowship is specifically for underserved Asian American students, right? So like, they are looking for a whole range of things, not necessarily that you have study abroad in France or did this or did that, right? Sometimes like when you tell your story, it's less about the experiences you bring, but the way that you show your growth through personal narrative. And like, and that's something that like you all can learn to do regardless of whatever background you have. Does that help? So yes, so one thing that you notice about the both examples is that like there is some kind of like insight that's gained towards the end, right? So the language is very, it creates a scene. There is a tension that gets resolved. You could follow through the arc, right? And then they develop kind of an insight of whether about teaching or whether about something about their identity, right? And they're speaking directly to the essay prompt, right? Because Fulbright is specifically to teach English in a different country. So what the applicant is doing is highlighting her teaching abilities and her pedagogy, right? So she's doing multiple things with just one example. With the second applicant, it's more about like your identity, right? And like, there's also a difference in style because of like word limit. The second applicant had much more word, like it was a 500 word essay to talk about those things, right? So it's like very focused on one particular topic, one particular scene. For the Fulbright one, the applicant had to talk about various kind of skills that she built. So her word count was much more restricted. So there were things that she couldn't develop as fully. So it seemed a little more, less narrative based. But I wanted you to see how like it was still telling a story in its own way and restrictions. Okay. Now I want to show you the recommendation letters that they got. Because I think oftentimes students think about those things as separate, but it's not separate because like your application includes the recommendation letters and they complement and work with each other, like, you know, to work with each other because, and that's where we'll talk a little bit about mentorship and how to ask for letters, but let me show you the PowerPoint again. So example 2. So this is sample recommendation. This is for the first applicant who, well, not first applicant, the second applicant that applied for the AANAPISI that talks about her identity. So if you look, this is a paragraph that I pulled, right? And at each beginning of the sentence, the recommender says, like the applicant demonstrates her leadership qualities, right? The applicant empowers individuals. She develops her skill. She communicates, she understands, she motivates, right? So each of these things is about what she's doing. So there's I guess a pronoun and then an action verb, right? And remember what this scholarship is about. Let me see. Strong emphasis on community service and leadership as well as solid academic achievement, right? So her personal essay showed her, I guess, being like part of like showing kind of like this community engagement, right? And like really being proud of her heritage, her religion, and it ties back into like the prompt or like what API Scholars is looking for, a strong emphasis on community service and leadership as well as solid academic achievement, right? So she does that in her personal statement here, right? Talking about, you know, dealing with like xenophobia. And then it's further reinforced by her sample, her recommendation letter. Okay, so this other one is for the Fulbright, right? And so here it's very similar. So like applicant stood out from the rest of the class. She understands, she interviewed, she demonstrated. I use her paper as a model text. she continued to do great work, right? So like, I think it's very important in part of your overall like application strategy to think about how all these things are working together. Do we have any questions so far? Okay, so
Lynn, could I comment for a second?
sure.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important to know that it all should work together. And the hard part of it is that you have no idea what your recommenders are going to write about you, right? So that's why it's important to write your personal statement early so that they can read it and you can talk to them about what you'd like them to emphasize. So that happens. What you're talking about is a kind of ideally the way it should happen. But remember, that's the part of the application you have no control over.
Mhm.
So I think it's helpful to remember that.
Yeah. So just to add on to what Stephen said, like, of course, you can't have any control over that, but you do have a little bit in terms of identifying who you want to ask, right? So I tell my students, just because you get an A in my class doesn't mean you'll get a strong recommendation letter from me, right? Like, I don't know you. I can't cite those like specific examples. So one of the recommendation letter sample is actually one that I wrote, the second one, right? It's a strong application because I know the applicant. I could actually cite those examples. So you want to think about, why are you choosing this professor besides getting an A? What can they speak to? And like, it's very important that you also send them your materials so they know how to strengthen, reinforce, and complement your personal statement. You also want to send them information, because oftentimes these scholarship websites have info for the recommendators, right? So it's super important that they get all this as a packet. Now let's go to the student panel, because I think it's very important that you hear from like actual students instead of me and Stephen, right? So let me pin them. Oops. All right, sorry. Okay, where's Hafsah? Okay, so Hafsah has her camera off because like she's having some internet issues. So just so you know, at pin. Okay, so Hafsah and Christina are actually former students of mine, you could say, and they were kind enough to share their experiences. So we have our two student panelists are Christina, Valeros, Hafsah, Ansar, and I'm gonna have them introduce themselves. Christina, did I say your last name wrong again?
Did. So I'm going to reintroduce it. Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Valeros. I graduated in spring of 2021. I studied human biology and public policy, and we're all supposed to talk about a favorite thing that we have about Lynn. So my favorite thing about Lynn is that in her mentoring group, she refers to us as minions.
Okay. Hafsah, your turn. Wait, can we hear her?
Hafsah, I think you're muted.
Muted.
It's okay, you can restart.
Sorry about that. Hi everyone, my name is Hafsah Ansar. I'm a senior at Hunter College, majoring in psychology and minoring in sociology. One favorite thing that I like about Lynn is that let's
We're supposed to come prepared.
I'm sorry. I had it. It was just that she always finds a way to make things humorous. You guys have definitely seen that in this presentation so far, so I really like that about her.
Okay, thank you. That seemed very forced, but so the first question, how do you decide if you want to apply for the scholarship or fellowship? Why don't we start with Christina and then we'll pass it off.
Sure. So in terms of deciding what to apply for, I like to start internally. So I identify like what my needs are, both professionally and personally. So as I'm going through even like deciding what applications to work on, like now, like I think about it in kind of like 3 different buckets. And so like I start with what my interests are. So it's asking myself like, what makes me angry? And what are the things that I need, the tools that I need to address it? I also think about growth. So like, as I'm like working right now, I'm like, okay, what do I still need professionally? So that might look like being in a cohort of people where I can like practice decision-making and feedback. That might look like a cushion space to grow with more like manageable stakes, but it's like asking myself like, what are still like the things that I need to grow. And also thinking about like a last bucket, which is kind of like questions that I still have, questions that I'm coming up from experiences that I've had prior. So right now, like I'm really thinking about, like different sectors outside of like the nonprofit sector, what it's like to work, for example, like in government or like in the private sector and still collaborate with community. Those are questions that have come up in my current work. And so just in kind of reflecting on my needs as they relate to like my interests, the areas in which I want to grow and questions that I still have about like what is next. Those are all things that kind of inform my decisions for like what kind of range of like scholarships and fellowships I want to apply for. So then I just kind of find those that kind of meet those different needs, and then I kind of do like research to decide which of those are the best fit so that I can strategically apply.
Hafsah?
Yeah, so for me, it's definitely not as strategic. I definitely just look at whether I'm eligible and what I can gain from participating in a fellowship or scholarship. So a lot of the times you get professional development opportunities and financial help. So that's definitely the two things that I keep in mind. And I think that if I can gain those things, that I would apply because yeah, I don't want to lose out on that. I don't want to lose out on that opportunity. And also, as Steve mentioned before, like you do get something out of just applying. So like you do get that like moment of self-reflection because there are those application essays, which can be tedious at times, but they do help you just think more about your identity and who you are. That definitely was true when I applied for the AANAPISI scholarship and other programs that are available at Hunter College.
So it seems like there's a lot of self-reflection as in like, where do I want to go? Where are the areas of growth? What would I get out of the scholarship, right? And those are all important questions because you actually probably would have to write about it in your essay, right? So like once you decide, how do you actually begin the application essay, right? Because it's starting is always the worst part. So maybe we could start with Hafsah.
Yeah, so for the AANAPISI scholarship, there are actually 4 essay prompts and you only have to choose 3. So for me, it was first focusing on which 3 do I want to choose. And basically, it was pretty simple for me just because the 4th prompt didn't really apply to me at the time. So I was like, okay, like this isn't even options. But one of the prompts was like describe a time that you displayed leadership qualities. And I was like, I don't know, but I had to write about it because that was the only remaining prompt left because I had to choose 3. So what I did was first, like really rack my brain about like what kind of write about. Nothing came to mind. So I asked my friends. I was like, "Have you guys ever like thought about like Hafsah is a great leader?" And they were like, "No, why would we think something like that?" So yeah, that was also off the table. And then I was like, okay, like maybe not. Maybe I wasn't a leader in a professional sense where like, I like led a big project or something, but maybe in an academic sense as a student. So I talked about how in the virtual environment, I had to really facilitate conversations in my group and how that displayed my leadership qualities. And I think that I did that well.
Yeah. So I think for Hafsah, she really thought she did some brainstorming. She thought outside of the box. She's like, I'm not a leader, right? But then like, she's like, oh, wait, leadership can mean many different things, right? And she picked something that applied to her, which kind of like, oftentimes like things are cliche but it's also true. Like, you want to be a doctor because you want to help people, right? So, but I think there's a way to write your story where you own your story so it doesn't become cliche. And like, I read Hafsah's statement actually, and it kind of talks about that process of like, just kind of like being put on the spot and just doing what's right. Okay. So Christina?
Yeah, when it comes to beginning essays, I like to write with a goal in mind. So I'll just start up with like saying like, I want to convey to my readers that I am XYZ. And XYZ is always going to be something that is informed by what they seem to want and also parts of me and my experiences that align with what they want. And so a lot of like for me, like starting requires like me actually researching like what is the organization mission? What are the program goals? Like even like thinking back to like the scholarship profiles that like Lynn was like showing earlier, like what is their ideal like applicant profile? While combining that with like some of the reflection that I'm doing about like my motivations for applying and like my experiences and my needs. I think other than that, like I always like to start with like a story. So like just making sure that writing is very like story centric or like moment centric. So to this idea of like, I don't know, like outlining some kind of tension that like eventually like had some kind of like resolution. Just thinking about a moment that demonstrates like my reason why and / or like my qualifications. And that's usually an easy jumping point for then like writing the rest of the essay.
Yeah. So I think it's very good to like have these kind of thick descriptions because oftentimes reviewers don't get paid to review your application. They're probably tired. So you want to leave them with an impression, right? Or like a character to think of. So I'm going to ask, you know, we see these wonderful essays that people write and they get the scholarship, the fellowship. How many drafts did you all go through before you like got your final draft? And who did you seek out support in writing these drafts? Hafsah? I forgot to call on one of you.
Yeah. So for me, I don't really know the amount of drafts, but I definitely did go through maybe around a couple rounds, maybe like 3 or 4 for my AANAPISI scholarship application. I think my social network definitely helped with that. I just depended on my friends. So I would just send it to them like one by one. So like let one friend look at it, let them edit, and then I would fix whatever they suggested and then give it to the other friend. And then after that, like in the end, I can like see everything that I've improved upon. And then if I'm still not confident, then I send it to my mentor for the JFU Scholars Program. And if I'm still not satisfied, then I can send it to the program coordinator of JFU Scholars because she does help edit application material.
You send it to a lot of people, Hafsah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you like the possibilities for the AANAPISI scholarship. I only just asked my friends and they really help with that. But usually for the other applications that I've done, I usually do go through a couple rounds. But I feel like after a while, like it just doesn't really seem like my paper anymore. Like there's just been so many changes and everything. So how do I really keep my voice? Which is why I just try to not, like, even if I'm like not completely satisfied, I can say like, okay, this is still my paper. This is still like everything that I've done. I don't want to change it too much just because then it's not really going to be my own. So I do know that limit. Yeah, that's what I've basically done.
So some really quick tips, like if you don't have like a mentor or like some coordinator to send it to, you could send it to your friends because personal statement is really about like 2 key things you can ask your friends is like, what is your impression of me after reading this, right? And also like, just like, are there areas that you're super excited about or really confused about, right? So there's a way to use peer feedback in a way that helps you inform. Also, if you're feeling like you're losing your voice, you need to take time away. And that's why it's so important to do a personal statement early because it often goes through multiple drafts. And you need a little bit of space. You need to like get away from it, maybe print it out and look at it with fresh eyes. Christina, how many drafts?
I think that it kind of varies, like depending on like the competitiveness of the program and how much time like I'm spending to kind of prepare for it. It can be anywhere from like 3 drafts to like one of my more recent ones. I think I went through like 10 or like 50 and it was really bad. But I will say that regardless of how many times I go through drafts, like the draft almost never resembles the final version. But one thing that I am really protective of is like my like personal voice. So like when Hafsah was talking about like wanting to kind of retain, you know, like if it doesn't sound like you, like it's not, I personally, I don't think it's like as effective. So like revisions are important, but also I guess keeping in mind like who you are and taking ownership of your story. Have definitely had like, you know, someone who's read my application and just like changed the writing completely. And I was like, no, I'm not taking this. But in terms of people that I've gone to Stephen for some, I've gone to Lynn, academic advisors, sometimes specific scholarship advisors, also friends, as well as people who have like previously won like the fellowship or scholarship. What I usually do is like, I'll like prioritize coming up with a draft that I feel comfortable showing people. I'll send that to multiple people and I will pick and choose revisions. And so sometimes I know that like some people in my life will give me more structural edits, so like content wise, and others will give more stylistic edits. And like, especially with like folks who like have won certain scholarships or fellowships, I like to go to them for like stylistic and structural edits because they kind of have like the general vibe of like what they're looking for. Yeah.
Just curious, Christina, what do you go to me for?
Structural.
Structural, okay, because I'm not a stylist writer.
No.
Thank you. All right. So next question. You know, how do you decide who to ask for recommendation letters, right? I'll let you guys talk, and then maybe I'll share a little bit as a faculty member what helps me write the strongest recommendation letter. So let's start with Hafsah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's more so about like who knows me best for that specific application, and also who would be willing to write that recommendation letter, given like the time constraints. Yeah, that's definitely the two things that I focus on. For me, I haven't really had like many choices for people to write recommendation letters for me, especially when I was applying for the AANAPISI scholarship or just applications during my sophomore year of college, such as the JQ Scholars Program. The Hunter Wellness Scholars Program is what I'm going to recommendation letter for. And for that, I just turn to my professors or my internship supervisor, just people who have really gotten to know me through my work, through the time that we actually just talked outside of class or like outside of our work. Because if you take the time to get to know someone and they put in the effort for you too, then I think that they'll be able to write a good recommendation letter for you. But I do think that it can be a little nerve-wracking, just like thinking about, okay, like I already asked this person for a recommendation letter. I feel bad if I do it again. So there's also that difficulty. Like if I'm applying to another fellowship, do I want to ask that same person? Would they feel burdened? So there's also that thing in the back of my head. But when I think of that, it's just like they've already written one for me, so they could just like tailor that for the next application. So I think it might be easier for them. So I think like definitely just get out of your head when you think about recommendation letters, just because the people that you're asking for recommendation letters have asked others for recommendation letters in the past. So they already know that whole process. They know how important it is for your professional development. So they will help give you that helping hand. And then in the future, you're going to need to write recommendation letters for our students if they do ask. So like there's just that whole process. You just have to be accustomed to that and know that like it shouldn't be like as intimidating or as uncomfortable as it should be.
Yeah, like totally correct. Like if I already have a recommendation letter that I wrote for a student, it's a lot easier because I'm not starting from scratch. So Christina, how do you decide who?
For me, I think like definitely like echoing like Hafsah's point, just like thinking about people just generally who I think but the step that I'll usually take is like I'll first like figure out like what like the ideal applicant profile is, and I'll think about the qualities and or experiences that like this program or fellowship or scholarship is looking for. And sometimes like we'll be really clear about it and be like, recommenders are expected to speak to your maturity and your commitment to whatever. In that case, like it's super helpful to kind of have like a roadmap for who to best ask. And sometimes they're not so clear about it, but it's important to kind of like find that information first. I'll then like list like my potential recommenders. So thinking about people who know me well enough and anticipate like which qualities or experiences I think that they can speak to, and being really honest with myself about whether I think they can actually speak to those things or not. I'll then like confirm that I have like potential recommenders who can speak to my strength. And if I can't come up with a list, I'll like kind of reconsider applying. But after that, like I'll just ask them and I'll like be really like, I'll make every effort I can to kind of support my recommender too. And so to kind of like Hafsah's point about like that discomfort, that anxiety, like what if they say no? That could very well happen, like whether they've like written you a recommendation letter or not. And what you do have control over is being able to explain the program giving them your reasons for applying, giving them all the information that they need to make a decision as to whether or not they are able to like write a letter and support you in this moment. And I also like to schedule offer to schedule like a brief call to like answer any of their questions if they might be on the fence about it.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So I'm going to stop the panel. I think maybe we could stop recording. Caitlin, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that sounds